Hello, this is Sophy Ridge. You're watching the Politics Hub, and we want to take you straight to the White House, where Donald Trump is hosting the Norwegian Prime Minister.
We understand each other very well. I think we'll have no problem.
You think that we'll get an agreement?
I think we'll have no problem whatsoever with Norway.
Mr. President, did you discuss a possible visit to Norway? Did you discuss a possible visit for President Trump to
We
Norway?
didn't, but I love it. I mean, I've been there, and it is a beautiful place. They have.
But I told the president that, you know, he is receiving us early in the term. He's welcome to visit Norway. We would like to have him, and it will be another way of emphasizing this strong friendship.
Mr. President, Norway has been a staunch supporter of Ukraine since the Russian invasion in 2022. Has something been discussed here today that may have altered your views on things?
No, we want to, very simply, I have no allegiance to anybody. I have allegiance to saving lives, and I want to save a lot of lives. A lot of young people, mostly young people. It's the war. It's the soldiers, and if we can do that, also, as you know, I got started because the money that's been spent on this war is insane. It should have never happened, and it would have never happened if I were president. But Biden spent $350 billion on this, and it's a shame, and that's what got me involved. And then I looked at, and I see the results. It's horrible. It's a killing field. 5,000 soldiers a week on average, and we want to stop that. We both want to stop that for a lot of reasons, but I would say that is my #1 reason.
Do you think that we will get Russia to accept a deal that also Ukraine and Europe is willing to?
I think so, yeah. I do. I believe they will accept, and I think we're going to get this over with. I hope so, soon.
You continue to lack support from NATO allies in your goal of obtaining Greenland. How will you proceed if you don't get that support?
Well, Greenland's going to be interesting, but that's for another day. I think we need that for international peace.
What are you expecting of your
And if you
allies?
don't have that, I think it's a big threat to our world. So I think Greenland's very important for international peace. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Mr. President, this morning in a Truth Social post, you used the words, Vladimir, stop. That seemed like a slightly different message, a personal message. What is your level of frustration with President Putin
I didn't like
at this
last
point?
night. I wasn't happy with it. And it's, you know, what is it? I assume that's what you mean.
Sorry.
Yeah.
If the bombs keep falling, will you consider additional sanctions toward Russia, or what will you do if President Putin...
I'd rather answer that question in a week. I want to see if we can have a deal. No reason to answer it now, but I won't be happy. Let me put it that way. Things will happen.
Mr. President, why are you not putting more pressure on Russia? I know a lot of Europeans...
Putting a lot of pressure. You don't know what pressure I'm putting on Russia. They're dealing. You have no idea what pressure I'm putting on Russia. We're putting a lot of pressure.
Can you maybe tell us that?
We're putting a lot of pressure on Russia, and Russia knows that, and some people that are close to it know, or he wouldn't be talking right now. The Prime Minister understands that better than anybody. He wouldn't be talking right now. He's talking, and we're putting a lot of pressure. I think he wants to make a deal. We're going to find out very soon, but it takes two to tango, and you have to have Ukraine want to make a deal too, and they're being hit very hard, and I do believe they want to make a deal.
Mr. President, you said that the Ukraine have to give some territory to win peace, among them Crimea. Do you stand by that? And I know that the former NATO General Secretary today has told you that he does not agree, and he believes in territorial integrity of the Ukraine. How will you deal with that with your allies? And do you stand by that Ukraine have to give?
Former
Crimea
Secretary General happens to be right here, you know, so they can't put words in his mouth. He's been a great general, frankly. It was because that's what you are. Really, you're a general. But he's been a great Secretary General. We had a tremendous relationship, very successful, and I think he could speak for himself. He's right here.
But do you still agree that Ukraine have to give some territory away to win peace?
Well, it depends what territory. They've been fighting. They've lost a lot of territory. And we'll do the best we can, working with Ukraine. We'll do the best we can. But they lost a lot of territory. When you say Crimea, That was handed over during a president named Barack Hussein Obama. That had nothing to do with me, Crimea. That was 11 years ago with Obama. And they made a decision. There wasn't a bullet fired. There was no fighting. There was no anything. They just handed it over. Now they say, well, can you get it back? I think that's going to be a very difficult thing to do. That was given by Barack Obama when he was president, not by Donald Trump.
Thank you, Mr. President. You had a long meeting, Mr. President. Proposal that you put on the table. It's a 30-day ceasefire proposal. Your national security team presented it to both Ukraine and Russia. 2 months ago, Ukraine agreed to that ceasefire proposal immediately. Russia has not. And my question is Russia the obstacle to peace based upon that, just getting to that 30-day ceasefire?
I don't think so. I think that they both want peace right now. They're ready to do something. We'll see what happens. Complicated, very complicated. But I think they are both very much looking to make a deal. Marco, what would you say?
Well, first of all, what was put before our partners was options to discuss about things that it would take to end a war. This war is endable. Both sides just have to agree to it. We've shown them a pathway forward. We've discussed those ideas. It was a good meeting yesterday. There'll be good meetings over the weekend. We've shown them the finish line. We need both of them to say yes. But what happened last night with those missile strikes should remind everybody of why this war needs to end. It's horrible those missiles landed. What's even worse is there are today people that were alive yesterday that are not alive today because this war continues, and the president wants to stop it. And everyone should be thanking the president for being a peacemaker and trying to save lives. That's what we're trying to do here. It's not our war. We didn't start it, as you know. But we're trying to end the dying. We're trying to end the destruction. And we've shown the path forward. We can see the finish line, but both of them have to get there. We're going to do everything we can to help them get there, but they have to ultimately say yes.
And we are using a lot of pressure on both. You know, if you think we're just in there because we're nice people, and we are nice people, but we're using a lot of pressure on both.
What concessions, Mr. President, and to your national security team, what concessions has Russia offered up thus far to get to the point where you're closer to peace?
Stopping the war, stopping taking the whole country. Pretty big concession.
Mr. President, if you are going to take down the tariffs, what do you want Norway to buy more of from the U.S.?
To buy more? Well, you don't need snow. You don't need skis. You don't need ski champions either, right? You have a lot of them. We just want to keep the relationship the way it is. We've had a great relationship. I think now maybe closer than ever, but we've had a great relationship with Norway. I think just keep it the way it is. You can't do better.
Really? You not even buy, say,
well, if they want to give us some additional concessions, that's okay. You can't do much better. Yes,
Mr.
yes.
President, you had a long meeting with Norway today. You said that Norway is doing a lot of things right, but on the Ukraine, if I can ask both you and the Prime Minister, did you find common ground today on Ukraine and the peace plan?
Totally. It's totally common ground. The Prime Minister can speak about it, but I can just say he wants to see people stop dying more than anything else, and he'd like to see it end. He's going to help us end it.
Mr. President, can I say that to move towards an end of this war, U.S. engagement is critical, and President Trump made that possible. That is clear. That is obvious. It's really happening. Now, the important thing is that both parties have to know that they have to deliver, and they have to feel the pressure to deliver. Ukraine is under attack. They are defending themselves. Lives are being lost. And we believe very firmly that there needs to be a ceasefire, the initiative taken by the U.S. Some time ago. It needs to be respected. And then to move on to something which both parties can own. That is the complicated part in such a dramatic war. And here I believe Europeans and Americans working together, as we do much closer now. And I salute the team of President Trump of being, open in that process. We had a good discussion on this today, and then we have to move on, and we cannot lose time because this is too much drama happening. One thing is people losing their lives, but it is a bad thing for Europe, and it's a bad thing for the world to having such a broad conflict going on. It can have ramifications far beyond Ukraine.
Mr. President, follow-up question on China. Mr. President, if I forgot my question. No. I wanted to ask about.
It's all right. That happens to the
It
best
happens
of them.
sometimes, yeah. No, Mr. President, I wanted to ask about the. Well, actually, Zelensky has said that he wants more Patriot missiles. So far, has been no response from the United States. If you and the United States decides to pull out of negotiating for peace, trying to broker peace, does that also mean a no on Patriot missiles, a no on sharing intelligence with Ukraine?
Let's see what happens. I think we're going to make a deal. And if we make a deal, that'll be wonderful. We won't have to worry about your question. You can ask that question in 2 weeks, and we'll see. But I think we're getting very close. The Prime Minister feels the same way, and we'll hopefully not have to answer that question.
Mr.
President, Norway is the third country to be officially invited to the White House after Liberation Day. Why did you invite Norway so soon to the White House?
Because I like them. And I like your Prime Minister, and I like the way your government runs. And I respect the King. He's highly respected in Norway. It's a great thing. Not an easy thing to do. He's done a great job. Yeah.
Would you like an invitation to visit the King?
Absolutely. You get me that invitation.
I just told the President he's welcome to visit Norway.
President Trump, first like part
Yeah,
you said before that you like the Norwegian Petroleum Fund, and I'm wondering if that has been up for discussion today, the way that we have structured our money and whether.
Well, this fund was created in the late 1990s to save for future generations the income from oil and gas. Norwegians should continue to work as hard, dedicated, innovate and move forward, despite having these incomes, which we happen to be in the period of our history where we can harvest, and we have transferred that into investments, half of them, by the way, here in the United States. So I think this is a model which we have been able to explore. If we can share experiences, and we do with our colleagues in the US, you never copy this one-to-one, but there can be techniques and way of working that we have used in organizing our fund. Jens Stoltenberg was the finance minister when the first dollar entered that fund. So he is a safe hand to have as a finance minister today. What do you say?
No, and as you said, Mr. Prime Minister, we are ready to sit down with the US to also work with them on if they want to establish a sovereign wealth fund, because we have a good experience with our fund. And I think that one example of how we work together with the United States is that half of the fund, close to $1 trillion are invested in the United States, mainly in equity, but also some in fixed income, including government bonds. So this is an expression of trust in the United States, expressed by the strong investment of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Then just briefly on Ukraine, since it was mentioned, we had a very good and extensive discussion about Ukraine, the path forward to peace. And as the Prime Minister said, we commend the US for pushing forward to try to find a negotiated solution. At the same time, we need to continue to support Ukraine, and therefore I'm proud that Norway has actually tripled the military support to Ukraine, and this year we will allocate close to $8 billion to Ukraine. That will strengthen them and also their hand on the negotiating table.
If I may add to that, if there's a peace, and there will be a peace, we have a common responsibility in securing democratic Ukraine for the future, and the best security guarantee they can have is the ability to defend themselves, and we are investing in that.
Mr. Prime Minister,
Mr. President, as it relates to tariffs, Mr. President, when you unveiled your reciprocal tariffs on April the 2nd, the tariff rate for Norway was 15%. Based upon your conversations that you've had today with the Prime Minister, do you see that tariff rate coming down from what you proposed just a few weeks ago?
Well, they have a great fund of $2 trillion. It's a big fund, and they don't have any debt. So I think they'd probably be willing to pay us more than that, I hope.
Are the two nations in agreement as which countries?
Mr. President,
Yes.
in 2018, your former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo called for an end to Russian occupation of Crimea. Why has this administration changed its stance on territorial concessions for Crimea?
Well, the war started. It would have never started if I were president. This is a war that is a horrible horrible. All wars are horrible. This one is in particular bad. And I don't know that you can ever say there's going to be a winner to this, because so many lives have been lost, not only soldiers. I mean, a lot of lives have been lost. I think that we want to do one very simple thing. It would have never happened if I were president. Zero chance it was going to, and it didn't. You know, people say, how do you know that? Number one, it didn't happen. We never even discussed it. I would talk to Putin about it. It was the apple of his eye. You know, Ukraine was the apple of Putin's eye, but there was never even a thought that he'd go in. And I think he understood that I would not be happy if he did. And it was only when I got out, and you know, when you mention what happened to Ukraine years ago under President Obama and a vice president that was also president later, unfortunately for this country, what happened is large chunks of land were given up, and it was called Crimea, and that was a big thing. That was a big moment. But this isn't my war. This is Biden's war. This is a war that Biden was president when this war happened. But I'm trying to put out the fire, and I think we'll be successful. And if we do, we're going to save a lot of lives. Otherwise, and the Prime Minister had a statement. He said, this is just a point in time. We're very lucky because this is a point. And if this doesn't happen, this could go on for a long time.
Mr. President, will you have meetings with other world leaders when you're in Rome, sir?
Future Democrat president?
I don't think he will. I think he wants to make peace. I think he wants to end it. And I feel pretty confident of that. But we're gonna know pretty soon.
Mr. President, will you have meetings with other world leaders when you're in Rome?
Yes, I will.
Which leaders do you want to meet, sir?
Well, I'd like to meet them all. That would be nice. I'd like to take care of all of them, but we have many of them there, and they all want to meet. They want to meet about trade. And we are making some great inroads and great deals. You might want to speak about that, Mr. Secretary.
We had a very successful bilateral meeting with the Republic of South Korea today. We may be moving faster than I thought, and we will be talking technical terms as early as next week as we reach an agreement on understanding as soon as next week. So South Koreans came early. They came with their A game, and we will see if they follow through on that.
President Trump, you're around the
Do you think you deserve the Nobel Peace Prize if you manage to create
Do I deserve the Nobel Peace?
If you manage to create peace?
Well, maybe for the Abraham Accords. I don't want to get ahead of myself on this one, but they say for the Abraham Accords. And by the way, speaking of that, we're going to be filling it up. A lot of countries want to come into the Abraham Accords. You know, we have 4. And Biden did nothing on that one, too. It's the same 4. But they're great countries, and they were brave doing it, and it's worked out very well. And we're going to be filling up the Abraham Accords. They're going to be, I think, filling it up very rapidly. Mr.
President,
could you say something about that?
There's great, enormous opportunity to grow the Abraham Accords. But I would just point to one thing. Of all the leaders in the world today, no leader is working harder to prevent wars or end them than President Trump is right now. That's why we're talking to Iran. That's why we're engaged with Ukraine and Russia. It's the desire to prevent these wars from breaking out and to end the ones that exist already. And again, I just think it's tremendous for our country to be led by a president who desires to bring peace and establish peace and protect peace. So it's hard work.
Mr. President, you know, Marco just mentioned something that maybe we should talk about for just a second, if we could, Mr. Prime Minister. And you're involved in it, too, because you've been involved in the world and peace. But I think we're doing very well with respect to Iran, and we're having very serious meetings. And there are only 2 options, and the one option is not a good option. It's not a good option at all. And I think we're doing very well on an agreement with Iran, but that one, we're doing a lot of things, I will say, but that one is well on its way. We could have a very, very good decision, and a lot of lives will be saved.
Mr. President, on the economy, there was a slowdown as it relates to home sales in the month of March, the slowest pace since 2009. Is that an economic indicator, and perhaps the Treasury Secretary can weigh in on this as well, is that an economic indicator that concerns you about the broader U.S. economy?
No, they had very good numbers on housing today, extremely good numbers. And that's despite interest rates, because, you know, if you look at what happened, everyone said, oh, I said I was going to get prices down. I did. Energy just hit $1.98 in a couple of states. It's way down. Energy's down, and we're about $64 a barrel. When I came in, and we were looking at $89, $90, $95. And by the way, that helps us solve the war, too. Having those energy prices is a big incentive for Russia to also agree with solving the war problem. Groceries are down. When I was with you 2 months ago, you were complaining about eggs. I said, I just got here. I was here for about a week when the press started saying about eggs have gone through the roof. I said, I just got here. Tell me about eggs. And they happened. They went through the roof and you couldn't get them. So we just had a big Easter egg hunt at the White House. Thousands and thousands of eggs. And the price was down 87%. So we did a great job. Housing is doing very well. We should lower interest rates. That's the Fed. I hope they lower interest rates. That's a smart thing to do. Be ahead a little bit, although already it's a little bit late. But in the end, we just have a great country. We have a very strong country, and we have every other country. I can't think of one country that doesn't want to negotiate a deal. And they either negotiate a deal or we set a deal that we think is fair. Because we don't have to go through all of these. It would be physically impossible. You know, you have so many people that really understand it, which is a very small group of people here. And we are going to, at some point, just set prices for deals. Some will be tariffed. Some treated us very unfairly. They'll be tariffed higher than others. But we've been ripped off for many, many years. The United States has been ripped off like no country probably in the history of the world has been ripped off for 45, 50 years. And countries have gone rich by doing that with the United States. We've taken care of their militaries, and military is another subject we talk about. We're not going to make that subject to any of the deals, but you know the same countries that I do where we virtually take care of their military and then they don't get treated fairly on trade. So the people, and I don't blame those countries, I blame the people that sat at that beautiful desk right behind you, because those people didn't do the job for this country, and they let us lose $4 billion a day on trade. We were losing $4 or $5 billion a day on trade when I got here, and now we're going to be much better than breaking even, and we're going to be making $4 or $5 billion a day on trade. So, but I don't blame any country, not the worst of them. And we were abused by countries. I blame the President of the United States that happened to be sitting when these deals were made. Disgraceful. When I was here, we had a great 4 years. We had the most successful economy in the history of our country, my first term. And we were very tough on trade. And with China, as you know, they paid hundreds of billions of dollars in tariffs. But nobody else ever did that. China paid not 10 cents to any other president. And but not only China, virtually every country got away with murder. And we just can't let that happen. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Head out. Please start moving. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, press. Head out. Let's go. Thank you. Keep going. Keep moving. Thank you.
One little mistake. So, one mistake.
Here, Al. Thank you.
So,
thanks, guys.
I just finished.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. No more photos. Thanks. Keep moving.
Well, it was a typically freewheeling press conference there from the US president, with his guest very much a bystander, discussing everything from the US being ripped off by just about everybody on trade to talking about the prospects of a peace deal in Ukraine. I think we'll get this over with soon. We're getting very close. But for me, the key passage, I think Putin wants to make a deal, but it takes two to tango. You have to have Ukraine want to make a deal as well. So perhaps a sense there of where any blame may be pointed if that deal doesn't get across the line. Well, let's get some more analysis on that now, shall we? Our US correspondent, Mark Stone, is in Washington for us. Mark, what did you make of that?
Well, I think bystanders might say that Putin would want a deal because he's getting a good deal at the moment. That appears to be the deal that is on the table, which would see the United States potentially recognising Crimea as Russian territory, that peninsula, of course, taken back in 2014. As Trump reminded everyone, that was when Barack Obama was president, so it's not his problem, so says Donald Trump. The deal on the table, which has to be said hasn't been published but has been widely leaked, would also mean that the front line of the war would be frozen effectively where it is, and you would get a state of a frozen conflict where the land to the east of that front line, wherever it is, would be effectively Russia, and the land to the west would remain Ukraine. And to that end, Donald Trump was asked what pressure he was putting on the Russians. He says, "You have no idea what pressure I'm putting on Russia." He wouldn't be talking right now, Putin wouldn't be talking right now if I wasn't putting pressure on. And then he said, stopping the war, stopping taking the whole country, that is a pretty big concession, he claimed, a concession of that Vladimir Putin is giving. Of course, for Ukraine, giving up a fifth of its land is not a good deal and not something that at the moment it appears willing to agree to. So therein is the heart of the problem. But more broadly, I did think that Donald Trump's tone seemed to be more positive, perhaps, than it has been over the past few days. He clearly irritated with what Vladimir, as he called him in his social media post this morning, did overnight with the bombing, very heavy bombing of Kyiv. He talked too about good movement in every respect in terms of the way the peace process, if that is what it is going. And he was asked, I thought this was quite interesting, where he was asked how he thinks it's going at the moment. He said, "Ask me in a week." I would rather answer that question in a week's time. So I think an assessment there from the American president that the coming days are critical. We know that Steve Witkoff, his deal maker in chief, who appears to be doing the role of Secretary of State at the moment, whether it be in the Middle East or indeed Russia, Ukraine, he's meeting Vladimir Putin tomorrow. That's very important. We know the conversations that were had yesterday in London were very important as well. So there's an awful lot going on behind the scenes. And he was asked too about the fact that he's going to Rome for the Pope's funeral this weekend. I think, on the sidelines of an historic event that is the funeral of Pope Francis, I think the diplomacy that will be ongoing and the sideline conversations that Trump will be having with many world leaders, whether it would be on trade and tariffs or on Ukraine, will be key indeed. Sophia, I could go on. There were lots of things that came out of that.
Yeah, there really were. I could go on as well, Mark. I'm sure we'll have plenty more opportunities to do that in the next week or so. It's going to be critical, as you say. Thank you. Well, let's just pause and reflect a bit more on Ukraine, shall we? Because what was very, very clear from what Donald Trump was saying there is that we are at such an important point when it comes to that conflict. America says the deal is close, but it's President Zelensky who is prolonging the killing field. And while all that's going on, Russia launched its worst missile attack on Kyiv in 9 months this morning. And honestly, I can't really work out whether Donald Trump is trying to bounce Ukraine and Russia into a deal or if he's preparing the ground to be able to walk away and blame everyone but himself. And one thing is completely, unarguably clear here. The British government is saying things that cannot be reconciled with the US position on Ukraine. Just firstly, just look at how they describe Vladimir Putin. So here's Donald Trump.
I think Russia is ready, and a lot of people said Russia wanted to go for the whole thing. And I think we have a deal with Russia. We have to get a deal with Zelensky, and I hope that Zelensky, I thought it might be easier to deal with Zelensky. So far, it's been harder.
That was yesterday, and it's fair to say he did condemn the Russian strikes on Kyiv today. But look, he started his presidency saying he believes Putin wants peace. And frankly, not much has shifted since that. We heard that this evening. And just contrast that position with Keir Starmer.
I think it's a real reminder that Russia is the aggressor here.
That's the message again and again. And until now, Number 10 have been keen to gloss over any differences with America. They don't want to get on the wrong side of the Trump administration. They need to keep them at the table. But that is frankly becoming unsustainable because now we're getting to the red lines necessary for any peace deal. And it's increasingly clear that the US and the UK are drawing them in entirely different places. So here's the UK Defence Minister talking about whether Ukraine could concede Crimea to Russia as part of a deal. And it's a hard no from him.
The UK's position regarding Ukrainian sovereignty is well known, and our position has not changed, and we do not recognise Russian sovereignty over any territory illegally seized from Ukraine, including Crimea.
So that's clear. But here's Donald Trump on Truth Social yesterday. He said, if Zelensky wants Crimea, why didn't they fight for it 11 years ago when it was handed over to Russia without a shot being fired? The situation for Ukraine is dire. He can have peace or he can fight for another 3 years before losing the whole country. You know, let's get real. You know, this is not a different nuance here. This is not a different emphasis. This is two leaders on two different planets when it comes to Ukraine. And it is hard to see any peace deal that both of them could back. And despite Donald Trump's condemnation of today's attacks in Kyiv, it was another day where the Prime Minister and other government ministers had to tiptoe around the glaring and growing disconnect between their policy on Ukraine and the words coming out of the Oval Office. We can pick up and talk a bit more now with our political correspondent, Ali Fortescue, who's here with us. And Ali, we just heard there from Donald Trump, again, effectively painting Zelensky as the block to a peace deal. And I guess the question is, how does Keir Starmer respond to this?
Yeah, and I think the thing that we've really seen today, Sophie, is a Prime Minister at pains not to directly criticise Donald Trump, probably unsurprisingly, and there has been pressure from the likes of the Liberal Democrats, Boris Johnson, I should say, also tweeting, effectively criticising President Trump's plans. So he is under some pressure. But I was asking the Prime Minister's spokesperson about this morning, and they said the Prime Minister shares Donald Trump's desire to bring the war to an end. But as you've just said, you know, there is obviously a mismatch, certainly when it comes to the language around President Zelensky, but also on the substance too. Questions about what will happen with Crimea. Sounds like it's going to be the sticking point. Will Donald Trump stand by this? Will he walk away? What would that mean? What would the UK's role in any future negotiations be? So, you know, there are so many unknowns. It's about trade too.
Yeah, it feels like such a critical thing. And as you say, if Donald Trump does walk away, then it really is over to Europe. Then, Ali, stay with us because we're going to have more from you. But I just want to bring in a duo for this evening as well, the former Conservative advisor, Mercy Muroki, and the former Labour Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. Great to have you both with us. I mean, you've been here listening to Donald Trump, to listening to what he has to say. John, how do you think Keir Starmer should respond to this? I mean, it's difficult, isn't it, for him?
It's really difficult. The reality, though, listening to all of that, I think Putin has played Trump like a fiddle. I really do. Remember, only a few weeks ago, it was about a ceasefire. That's what Trump put on the table. You know, within a day of being elected, he was going to bring about a ceasefire. Putin has pushed him off that. Putin has then obviously put demands on the Crimea. We want Crimea. Again, I just feel that now that Trump, exactly as you said, Putin's played to his vanity. So I think Trump is now looking to blame everyone else apart from himself for failing on this. I'm afraid Europe is going to have to step up. And I think Starmer's right on that. We'll seek to, I think, encourage a peace deal. I think Zelensky wants a peace deal. And even if it's just a ceasefire that draws a line for that ceasefire, they'll never give up sovereignty of the Crimea, but they might accept a ceasefire that renders Crimea for the temporary basis to the Russians and have some aspiration for the future. That's the reality of what we're facing.
And I guess the difficulty as well is, you know, if you are in a situation where Russia accepts or takes over some of the territory that it has taken, then what's to stop them coming back for more? Mercy, what do you think about the situation?
Well, I think, as we saw there, you know, Donald Trump does like to blame sort of everybody but himself when he has the opportunity to. But I think this question of will he walk away or, you know, is he going to get a deal? You know, he's pinned his mast to this idea that I'm the one who's going to stop this war. You know, this wouldn't have happened, he said, if, you know, I was in power. He name-dropped Barack, he made choice to say Hussein, Obama, name-dropped Joe Biden, sort of blaming them and saying this wouldn't have happened if I was in power. And the idea that he can fail in this role and kind of fail in doing what he said he would do within 24 hours, I think actually that will be a very bad look for him. And so I actually do think that if even just for selfish reasons, he's very personally motivated to be the one that stops this war. I think this will be a critical time, really, in seeing whether these bullish tactics, these sort of kind of anti-diplomatic tactics that he uses are actually going to work. And this is not how diplomacy has traditionally been done. And, I'm quite hesitant about whether this will work, what he's doing.
I think Americans are waking up to the fact that this could be permanent damage to America, the Trump regime, economically permanent. We've now got a situation where the stock markets collapse and you expect then the rush of money to go into the dollar and then US treasuries. It didn't. They went into other currencies. So all of a sudden, the US dollar as the reserve currency is suddenly shaky. That's the first thing. The second is militarily. If you're demonstrating that Putin can play you that way, people lose confidence in your ability, therefore, to secure peace in the future. And I think just politically as well, there's an element of political morals here as well. If you do give in to an aggressor like that, what is going to prevent it in the future? So I think there's a number of Americans, you can feel it, and you can see it in some of the writings that are taking place, that this isn't just Trump to be endured. It's actually, he might be doing permanent damage to our country and our state.
I mean, it's the economics as well,
yes.
isn't it, that always will perhaps be the decider, whether it's like the price of eggs, for example, or inflation in the US.
Yeah, and, the thing is, Trump has been talking about tariffs and he's had a protectionist position since, for decades, pretty much, for like 20 years, he's been talking about this. So, people knew that this was his position when they were voting for him. And I think the reason they were willing, especially ordinary Americans, they're not going to understand the nitty-gritty of sort of what tariffs might mean and how it might play into how much money they have into their pocket. But what Donald Trump did promise was a vision, and that's how he framed this tariff issue, was that I have this vision for America where, we're going to sort of make America great again, we're going to claw back all the money that's sort of unfairly been taken away from our economy, and we're going to make life easier for you, we're going to make the price of eggs cheaper. And I think there are lots of Americans who will continue holding on to that hope.
He threatens the Fed, and then he has backed down within 2 days. And the treasuries, they're having problems on the yields there as well. So the money is not coming in, it's going out of the dollar elsewhere. And again, he's had to concede there as well. He then gives the 90-day interim period for negotiations. I think Americans are waking up to the fact that this is embarrassing overall, but I'm more worried about the permanent damage that he's doing to the overall system of how we manage our economies and also how we manage the politics, particularly when you're dealing with aggressive regimes.
It's a tough one for the UK government, isn't it? Definitely.
Really tough, yeah. And, we've got Rachel Reeves right now in Washington. She's going to be talking to her US counterpart, Scott Bessent, tomorrow. And, I think the tone that we're hearing around Ukraine is obviously linked to the fact that she is trying to carve out some special treatment. She's on a charm offensive, appearing on plenty of pro-Trump channels, trying to carve out something when it comes to the damaging impact of tariffs. Meanwhile, you've got the Prime Minister here meeting Ursula von der Leyen, talking about Ukraine, but also talking about our relationship with the European Union. What's that going to look like? Is he going to be talking about, things like fish, youth mobility, all these thorny issues? This is a Prime Minister, in a bit of a global blizzard, trying to grip onto something positive and not just be buffeted around by unpredictable world events.
I mean, just so much to discuss. There really is. We could be here all day, but thanks very much from all of you. Well, the war in Ukraine is one of the stories sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the journalist and author Rachel Shabby and the political commentator Tim Montgomery. Well, a little earlier, before Donald Trump spoke this evening, I spoke to the former UK National Security Advisor, Lord Peter Ricketts. Thank you so much for being on the programme. I'm really interested to hear, I guess, firstly, your assessment about where we are when it comes to Ukraine. Donald Trump, of course, promised to end the war. Is that any closer to happening?
Well, Donald Trump is impatient. He clearly would like a deal that he can announce with a great fanfare. But if he can't get a deal, I think he's close to the point where he's going to say, I'm going to walk away from this and leave it to the Europeans. And of course, Vladimir Putin has understood that. And I think he's been playing Trump rather successfully. He's offered one or two rather minor concessions, which he knows Zelensky can't accept on the other side. And therefore, he's feeling, I think, dominant, that he can continue this war, and that if Trump decides that he's had enough and won't have any more to do with it, that would suit Putin just fine. It leaves Zelensky in a much more difficult position.
So you think that Donald Trump is being played by Putin? Do you think that's what's happening?
I'm afraid so, because when you look at the proposals, at least that we know about from the Americans, they are most of them in favour of the Russian position and loading more pressure onto Zelensky. And this issue of Crimea, where America seems to have decided, Trump seems to have decided, that the right thing is for Ukraine to accept Russian sovereignty over Crimea, not just the fact that Russian troops are there. I mean, that's not something that Zelensky can accept. Of course, it'd be delightful for Putin if that was agreed, but I think it's a sort of poison pill that's been introduced by the Russians. They know it's impossible for Zelensky, and therefore Trump walks away, blaming Zelensky for a breakdown. That's what Putin is playing for.
You see, this is it, isn't it? Because you talk there about the possibility of Donald Trump just walking away. Is there, I guess, a theory that this is all a bit of a charade, that this is a deal that Donald Trump knows Zelensky is not going to be able to accept, but he's almost just trying to lay the groundwork to be able to walk away and blame Zelensky rather than taking responsibility himself?
Yes, I think his theory was that Putin is strong and Zelensky is weak here. That's why he keeps saying Zelensky's got no cards. To which Zelensky replies, I'm not playing cards. This is the survival and sovereignty of his country. So yes, I think he's decided that the way to get a deal is to force Zelensky into making painful concessions and therefore to reward Putin for his aggression. And if that can't be done, well, he'll say he tried and he will leave the scene. But at what cost? I mean, if it's then cutting off military aid and intelligence support to Ukraine, that leaves Ukraine in a much worse position and a much bigger weight on the Europeans. So it's been right for Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron to be working with this coalition of the willing for a plan B that is not what any of us want, but finds the Europeans actually taking most of the responsibility for ensuring that Ukraine can continue the war.
I mean, you're tapping there into the UK and the wider European response to it, and obviously it does, as you say, it makes sense for them to try and keep America at the table, to try and placate them where possible. But are we getting to the situation now where that is just no longer viable? If there's a deal on the table that Ukraine says no to and Russia says yes to, then what are the Europeans going to do?
Well, then they have to pick up the pieces as Trump walks away. They can't substitute for the amount of American military equipment that's been delivered over the last 2 or 3 years. They can perhaps substitute for the financial support that America's been giving. But over time, the Europeans have got to build up their defence industries to be able to take more of the strain, not just of supporting Ukraine, but also, by extension, doing more for European security. Because, another consequence, I think, of Trump walking away is downgrading American support for Europe. NATO, American presence in Europe and so on. So all of that makes it much more urgent that we get on with increasing defence spending, up the arms output from our industries. But in the short term, it leaves a lot of shortfall that is going to have to be coped with to keep Ukraine in the war and to find that they're not in a position where Putin crunches on kilometre by kilometre, smashing up cities and so on, to the point where they cave in. I don't think we're close to that, but it's making life much worse for the Ukrainians than it was before.
I think it's quite clear what winning looks like for Russia, but what does winning look like now, realistically, for Ukraine?
I mean, the best they could hope for, I think, would be a fair ceasefire. That is, a ceasefire which is more or less freezes the situation in the current position, doesn't involve them ceding any sovereignty, and crucially allows them to have security guarantees, both in terms of prospect of joining NATO, European forces on the ground, all of which Putin is trying to rule out. But that's sort of a kind of hold fast where we are now, with an opportunity for the West to rearm Ukraine, make it a stronger, a more spiky hedgehog against the Russians in decades to come. I mean, that's not a bad outcome. It's probably the best they could hope for in current circumstances, but it's not achievable if the Americans just, throw in their hand and walk away.
What do you think Keir Starmer should do now?
Well, I think he has to go on doing what he's been doing rather skillfully, which is corralling the Europeans, getting everyone in Europe to focus on the fact the world has changed. We are all going to have to take more responsibility for our own security, working with Macron. And when Chancellor Merz arrives in Germany shortly, he's a very strong pro-Ukraine figure, going to spend a lot more in Germany. That's a good trio, Starmer, Macron, Merz. And, I mean, trying to keep on terms with Trump. Of course, there's no point in just having an open breach with Trump. I think that's the right strategy. But it feels to me like the events are running away too quickly for the Europeans to be ready to really move in behind the Americans if they do walk away from this.
You see this as a thing, isn't it, as well? And it does feel that the one certainty, whatever happens, is Europe playing a bigger role defensively. When we sort of last spoke, you were... I'm trying to work out the right word, but you were, I guess, had concerns about what the practicality and the reality of European peacekeeping troops on the ground would mean in Ukraine. Do you still have those concerns?
I absolutely do. I really don't like this term peacekeeping. First of all, there isn't a peace to keep. And secondly, if there was a fragile ceasefire, the one place you wouldn't want British and European forces would be between the two sides in some sort of classic peacekeeping role.
Why? Because, I mean, I know, but just to spell it out, because you're putting them at risk of being shot at by Russia, that's what you're saying.
Exactly. I mean, the risk of a ceasefire breaking down, fighting breaking out, the Russians finding some way of getting at European forces, because they would hate the presence of European forces in Ukraine, some sort of ambiguous event that would quite easily lead into a shooting war with Russian
and then
forces.
we're at war with Russia.
And then we're at war with Russia. So that's not what we should be doing, and that's why peacekeeping is such a misleading term, in my view. And they talk about a reassurance force, is the other term you hear. I mean, that's better, but reassuring who about what? If it's reassuring the Ukrainians that in all circumstances we would be there to fight with them against the Russians, I don't think we can do that either. So it's more about support, I think, training, presence, staff support to them, that kind of thing, and continuing to arm them. But a large kind of fighting force of Europeans, including Brits, deployed in Ukraine feels to me like a very dangerous concept when everything is so unpredictable.
Spelling out the obvious difficulties and dangers of any proper, force, really, of European force in Ukraine, knowing that Donald Trump doesn't want to keep arming Ukraine, doesn't want to keep giving Americans. I mean, he's right, isn't he? Ukraine doesn't have any cards to play here.
Well, Ukraine is entitled to its territorial integrity and its sovereignty, and that's a right under the UN Charter, and that's what they've been fighting for. And as Zelensky keeps saying, he's not playing cards. If this was a property deal, no, he'd have no cards and he'd have to settle for a bad deal. But this is a country that is fighting for its survival, and has lost tens, hundreds of thousands of people. So they're looking at it in a very different way. This isn't a deal for them. This is about the longer-term survival of the security of their country. And that's why, yes, he's being difficult, but he's right to be difficult. And, Britain would be difficult if we were in the same place. And I think, therefore, it's two completely different worlds talking past each other. A property dealer talking to someone who's fighting for his life and the life of his country, literally. That's why they don't seem to be able to get on the same page.
It's been fascinating as ever to talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I've been always so powerful talking to Lord Ricketts there about the battle for Ukraine. Now, just want to bring it back to UK politics. We've got our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, here, because yesterday he brought us news of a recording of this man, the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, in which he talked about building a coalition on the right to get Labour out of office. Now, since then, he's been chasing reaction among senior reform figures, and he joins us now. Sam, what's been going on?
For the last 36 hours, Sophie, I've been talking about the leaked comments that we played you yesterday from Robert Jenrick, where he said he would not allow Reform UK and the Tories to fight it out and allow Labour to form another government after the next election. The question is, how's he going to do it? So what does Reform UK say about that? Everybody in Reform UK says, we don't want a pact, an arrangement, a coupon election, any kind of talks with the Tories. They're pretty clear about this. But I want you to watch this. What do they actually think of Robert Jenrick? So yesterday, I talked to Richard Tice, one of the most prominent MPs. Watch this.
That's not Richard Tice.
What's your message to Robert Jenrick?
Robert, look, you're saying some good things on justice, but you're in the wrong party, chap.
I mean, that feels more or less like an open door for Robert Jenrick. Should he choose the Tories are a mistake and he wants to go over to Reform UK? But is that the view even higher up in reform. Now, Sophie, I'm used to some politicians being rude about other politicians, but just take a deep breath and listen to the next 2.5 minutes of this. Robert Jenrick, it turned out this week, has been calling for a coalition on the right. When was the last time you spoke to him?
Yesterday.
Oh, yeah?
He wasn't in Prime Minister's questions. And I was leaving after PMQs and saw him entering the Palace of Westminster. Brand new suit on, all but I think he'd been to Savile Row. And I said to him, are you on a Ozempic, Robert? I mean, he's clearly shaping himself up to be the next leader of the Conservative Party. He doesn't care what internal division he causes within the parliamentary party, but he's actually mistaken. We are not going to do a deal with a Conservative Party that gave us record tax levels since the war, mass migration. I mean, I could go on.
So he would be welcome in Reform UK?
Maybe. Well, I think, if we thought he was genuine, yes.
What does that mean?
Well, don't forget, I mean, this is Robert Generic. This is Robert the Remainer. This is Robert the I don't stand particularly for anything at all, who suddenly appears to be on this Damascene road, this Damascene conversion. So, I'm not sure whether he really means...
OK, what's your test for that, though? I mean, earlier this week, you were Nigel the Socialist earlier this week, standing up for trade unions. What does genuine mean?
No. That's always a judgment, isn't it? You and I both know there are people in politics who are there through conviction, and there are people in politics who are there because they want to reach rank, position, and all that comes with that.
And what's your gut?
I'm really still not sure about Jenrick. I'll be honest with you, I'm really not sure. Because it's almost like an overnight conversion to saying a whole host of things that he did differently when he was in government.
Do you think he's the kind of person that gives politics a bad name?
Time will prove that. Time will prove that. At the minute, I'm sceptical. Look, we're all allowed, as we get older, to change our positions on things. Of course we are. But his current policy positioning just seems so far removed from everything he's ever stood for.
I mean, I think that's what you called a political drive-by.
I mean, I'm not sure tonight Robert Jenrick will feel particularly at home in Reform UK. Not sure Robert Jenrick feels particularly at home in Kemi Badenoch's version of the Conservative Party. So spare a thought for Robert Jenrick tonight.
That is pretty difficult. Sam, thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates there speaking to Robert. Oh my goodness.
He's not the leader of Reform yet.
Speaking about Robert Jenrick to Nigel Farage, still to come on the Politics Hub, a plague on public transport. We're going to ask if fines could stop so-called headphone dodgers ruining other people's journeys.
Over there, to your left. There have been airstrikes every day. Hezbollah are very sensitive about us showing any pictures, and we're being hurried away right now. It felt akin to riding into some sort of Armageddon. Many other areas have been hit badly. There are shells coming in every few minutes. Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city, where there's a column of Russian armoury. I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. It's trying to hit us. That's it. It got us then. There's a lot of action going on. A lot of hits still. We were the first journalists and the only outsiders to reach the site of the attack several weeks after it happened.
We found from the missile.
It's very difficult to see what around here could be conceived of as a legitimate military target. Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, a boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa! Getting up close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
The Premier
Running is live exclusively on Peacock. Catch your breath. Sunday, a strike towards Premier League history is in sight, with Liverpool on the edge of a second Premier League title. Full of tension, full of jeopardy, full of goals. Spurs look to thwart their trophy hopes. Everything magnified. This is the Premier League Run-In, live exclusively on Peacock.
You're watching The Politics Hub. We've got Mercy and John with us, of course. It's hard not to comment, I think, on Sam Coates' interview there with Nigel Farage. What did you make of it?
What a friendly conversation. My view, it's not about generic. It's whether or not Reform will do a deal with the Tories eventually. They're not going to do that before an election because they want to distance themselves from the Tories, so that's why he'll slag them off all he possibly can. Once those elections are over and you get to mid-term of the Labour government, and maybe Badenoch is not there, maybe not, I think that's when Farage will do the deal. And I think that's what they'll be aiming for, basically. He'll argue it'll be Reform taking over the Tories. It will be a right-wing deal because he's pulled the Tories so far to the right.
Do you agree with that?
Well, I think they have no incentive at all at the moment, as John said, to do that. I mean, even Lord Hayward, who's a pollster and a Conservative peer, his own sort of conclusions about what might happen in the local elections is that, you know, Reform are pretty much going to wipe out lots of Conservative and Labour seats. And so, you know, right now there's no incentive. And actually, I think any deal would be a win for Reform. It wouldn't be a win for the Conservatives.
Well, we just mentioned the local elections, and with those votes looming next week, political parties from across the spectrum are putting forward policy proposals, and among the latest is one from the Liberal Democrats, who are calling for fines of up to £1,000 for people who do something I'm sure we've all experienced. Yeah, those people who play loud music on buses or trains. And Jim, our amazing floor manager, is basically just gate-crashed our studio to demonstrate the headphone dodger. Love it. What's the
This is Crazy Horses by the Osmonds.
And that's what you'd interrupt people on a bus ride with,
Yeah.
Crazy Horses by the Osmonds. I'm not sure if Jim's mic's on, but basically, right, clear off.
Sorry.
No, I'm joking. He's basically in control, the real boss of the studio. Jim, I absolutely love it. Mercy and John, what do we think? Is this, like, fair enough? You know, this is something that is really irritating for everybody, or actually is it going a bit far, these fines, Mercy?
I think that there was a suggestion. Was the suggestion £1,000? I think that's a bit excessive, don't you?
It's the Osmonds, £2,000.
Well, the problem is it's never
You're going to get kicked out.
It's never something that you know people might enjoy. It's always this kind of Gen X or which one's the youngest generation? Gen Z. It's just some really annoying kind of Gen Z music. That's because it's often young children playing it, and I think it's actually just speaks to the fact young people have lost a sense of just being polite, and there's certain things you don't do, like play loud music on the train.
I come in the bus every morning. I come in on the tube as well. Most of the youngsters on our buses have got either the pods or the headphones on, and it isn't a big issue. So it's almost like stepping back 10 years ago.
I get the bus into work, and I have to say, my part of London, there is an awful lot of people playing on phones. It's not actually music; it's more just you know, like YouTube or watching football.
I don't mind watching the football, but
yeah, if you can peer over their shoulder and see the result, it's actually not too bad.
I suppose it depends on the music. Yeah.
And what would you, if you were Prime Minister for a day, what would you ban? What would you fine?
Oh, the one that's driving me bad at the moment.
Here we go.
It's fly tipping. It's the same.
Yeah, that's fair.
There is a mattress that is following me about my constituency. I promise you.
Breaking news.
It drives me up the wall.
Yeah.
You should do a Robert Jenrick-style TikTok video on it.
I did. When I was Shadow Chancellor, I came home one night and I was on my phone, and it was quite dark, and I fell over some fly tipping. And it was the budget the following. And I went into broadcast news the next morning. I was covered in blood and all that sort of thing. And they said, "Oh my God!" What? Anyway, Philip Hammond, who's the Chancellor at the moment in the budget, give me a sense of humour. He put an extra 15 million into fly tipping in the budget.
There you go. Actually worked. Thanks both very much indeed. Great to get your thoughts on everything from fly tipping to, of course, the very important issues we discussed at the beginning. Great to have you on. Well, that's it from us for this week. But I'll see you Monday at 7 p.m. Up next, you've got the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee, and then at 9 p.m, The World with Yalda Hakim. Have a great weekend and a great Friday. I'll see you on Monday.